as I provide more and more safety, my incremental cost of providing that safety goes up. Okay, so this is what an individual employer would face with regard to the marginal cost of providing more safety. So I've got on the vertical axis marginal cost, and here, as the amount of safety increases, my incremental cost steadily rises. Now, what's on the other side of this decision? On the other side is the benefits of providing more safety. And as we've already explained, the benefit is that the employer doesn't have to offer as high a wage. Right? So as safety goes up along this horizontal axis, the amount of wages, incremental wages that I have to pay, I would expect that to fall. So this is you can call it the marginal cost of increased salary. It's also the benefit of providing more in the way of safety, and as a result, my expenses with regard to my employees goes down. Okay? So this would be the optimal level of safety, namely where marginal benefits, which is equated to the marginal cost of increased salary, is equated with the marginal cost of providing safety. Now in this setting, all I've done here on the left-hand side of this graphical analysis is describe what I have just explained with regard to the graph itself. What this marginal cost of increased salary, basically that reflects the fact that workers command higher wages at lower levels of safety. Now, you're never going to get the right answer unless the workers know what the relationship is between safety and the risk that they face. Right? And they have to be educated about this relationship if they're going to make informed decisions. In this graphical analysis, in equilibrium, employers will provide the efficient level of safety by actually pursuing their self-interest. And in pursuing their self-interest, if everyone is fully informed, they will do so by equating their incremental cost of safety with the benefit that they're able to capture through reduced compensation for their employees. Let's complicate this just a bit, because we know there's a lot of heterogeneity out there. It depends on the kind of chemicals you're looking at. The marginal cost of safety is going to be much different depending on the product that you're producing. Moreover, employees have different degrees of risk aversion and also different degrees of susceptibility. Right? Certainly, employees that are pregnant women are going to be much more concerned about the risk associated with dealing with toxic substances than, say, a male who is in his elderly years. Okay, so here what I'm doing in this particular graph is providing you with alternative marginal cost of providing safety. This is a much higher marginal cost for providing safety for some firm or company. This is another company with a lower marginal cost of providing safety. And I'm looking here at employees, some of which are highly risk averse. And for highly risk averse employees, they are certainly going to command or demand more in the way of compensation to reflect their risk aversion. So, as we discussed early in this class, the two types of people in this world, those who believe there are two types and those who don't. Here, in all asymmetric information problems, to set out the logic and the conceptual foundation, what economists do is they divide the world into two groups. And that's what I'm doing here as well. And the two groups are two types of firms, and the two types of firms are reflected here in terms of the difference in the marginal cost of providing safety. And the two types of workers are one type of worker that is minimally risk averse, which is associated with this particular marginal cost of increased salary, or you can call that the marginal benefit of increased safety, and then a second with regard to the increased salary for highly risk averse. Okay, so there are two types of firms, which I just described. The two types of workers, highly risk averse, who demand a higher compensation because of the risk premium they place on their employment. And then we ask ourselves, gee whiz, how many equilibrium are there given these two types of firms and two types of employees? And that's what the next slide is designed to do, is to look at each of the equilibrium points. First, this Q1 is the equilibrium that would emerge for a firm that has a high marginal cost of providing safety with employees that are minimally risk averse. And so on. I've got 4 different equilibrium points here. And on the left side of this slide, I describe each of these 4 equilibrium. There's a low marginal safety cost and high risk averse, namely this particular point, which is the intersection between the employees that are highly risk averse with a firm that has a low incremental cost of providing safety. And then the next combination is one with low marginal safety and a minimally risk averse. Once again, that is the equilibrium here at Q3. The high marginal safety cost and high risk averse is the next equilibrium point, which is unfortunately the outcome in which the marginal cost of providing safety is very high, and it's also a company that's dealing with employees that are highly risk averse. And then finally, the high marginal safety cost with those employees that do not have the same sensitivity to the risk associated with the manufacture or distribution of those toxic materials. Okay, so what's the conclusion of this analysis with regard to employer-employee relationships? Individuals clearly vary on their willingness to take on risk. Right? Certainly, those... What was the name of the British Petroleum platform? Again, I seem to have forgotten. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure that those individuals that were on that platform were certainly not as risk sensitive as most of us, right? Because they wouldn't have been on the platform but for their willingness to take that risk. Whether they were compensated adequately for assuming that risk, that's a different question. But it also points out that uniform safety rules that might be advanced by well-meaning people in governmental positions or in public discourse, even though it's attractive, it's not efficient. Right? And the reason it's not efficient is because there's great heterogeneity in terms of employees' willingness to take risk. And if they're compensated in accordance with that risk, then only in those circumstances will we achieve economic efficiency. But we can't get there unless the workers have full information about the occupational risk. By the way, when you say, you're sitting there saying, by the way, this professor sounds really naive, right? What do you mean full information? How in the world, if given all the causal analysis with regard to the science with respect to whether we've got acute toxicity or chronic toxicity and what the causal effect relationship is, how can a particular worker be fully informed? Well, they can certainly be informed, but at the end of the day, their information is going to include probability distributions about the possible risk down the road, and those probability distributions may be very diffuse, right? Yes?
I have two questions.
Sure.
First one, that's something like something economically efficient, but if the rules are in place to, like, save money in the long term, like in terms of what compensation and efficiency are doing, then are those costs uniform?
No. You're looking at it in terms of the actual consequences ex post. You're looking at it after the fact and say, gee whiz, I'm going to treat all harm that takes place in a uniform way. That's different than treating all employees ex ante the same way. Okay. Right? That's the difference. And you want to create the right incentives before the fact, not after the fact. Okay. Now, there's all sorts of ethical concerns because clearly, if I'm an employer and I've got certain populations that are more risk tolerant than others, then I can influence my marginal cost of safety by only employing those particular people who have high degrees of tolerance. And here, there is a brief description in your slide deck that goes to what happened in a number of employer-employee relationships where the employer, because they were producing certain products that pose significant risk to pregnant women, what was their solution? Their solution was, all pregnant women are fired. Okay? Because I want to keep my marginal cost of safety lower than it would otherwise be. And that is a pure economic, efficient outcome, but is it ethical? And that question has been visited by the court system, and it's gone all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in the second slide here, I refer to two major cases. One, American Cyanomen. They actually banned all fertile women, or whenever an employee got pregnant, they immediately dismissed them, and there was an action brought against them, and the employer was fined. And shortly thereafter, a union sued Johnson Controls because they too attempted to reduce their cost of providing safety, the actual exposure and consequences, by eliminating a part of the potential employee population. And that particular case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled, so much for economic efficiency, this is unethical, and you, the employer, have to invest in safety. And also, you cannot discriminate against different segments of the population with regard to their employment. Okay, now let's turn away from employer-employee and look at producer and consumer relationships, where again, there is the question of safety, and the investment in safety happens in much the same way it takes place with regard to employer and employee. Let's look at, once again, two product types to make it simple and transparent. Let's suppose there's one product type that's more expensive, it's safer. This could be an automobile, and there's any number of products, could be food products, right? Many people have a higher willingness to pay for organic food because they believe it's safer, right? It's safer to their health. And if the only information you have about a product with regard to its safety is its price, right, then there's an incentive on the part of producers who have unsafe material to disguise the fact that it's unsafe by charging the same high price. So you can't make your consumer choices just based on price alone because it may be a sufficient statistic, a good signal, or it may not. And I'm going to talk about this in a moment, if you look at toys that were imported from China, those toys, which have the same functionality, were sold at the same prices as toys produced here in the United States. And clearly, the safety distinction has been documented as being significant. Okay, so there are two product types they're going to look at, two customer types. The highly risk-averse customer types go for safer products, and the minimally risk-averse go for the cheaper products. So this is a gross generalization, but if you walk into a grocery store and you see someone going up and buying all of their food as organic, I'm going to represent to you that person is more risk-averse than I am, whoever that person is. Okay, so here too, because of all the heterogeneity that exists, the uniform safety standards will not, as in the case of employer-employee relationships, will not be economically efficient. And this is before the fact, once again. And if everybody had full information, the market will result in efficient equilibrium. And there would be no strategic conduct about mispricing a product that wasn't as safe as another product. Right? Because if you had full information and some producer or seller tried to misrepresent the safety of that product, you would know because you have full information. Not very practical, is it? But at least conceptually, it's a way of sorting out the distinctions. Right? But quite obviously, based on what we've just said, the market does not have complete information, and thus we can't expect the market to ensure an efficient outcome. Let's look at why one uniform product safety standard is a simple example to convince you that it's not economically efficient. And I'm going to look at automobiles. There is an automobile that is produced, manufactured, and sold in India and other parts of the world, and that particular automobile, surprisingly enough, only costs $2,000. Right? It has no safety features whatsoever. None. All right? There are no airbags. You don't have to worry about airbags popping you in the head when you don't expect it. They don't have advanced braking systems, but it costs only $2,000. Toyota cars. They vary all over the place, but certainly they have airbags, also safety equipment of all sorts, and that cost of that particular car is $20,000. So if I look at those two prices, like, gee whiz, I know the Toyota is safer, right? But moreover, suppose that a particular country, say India, came along and said, all cars must satisfy the standards that are used by Toyota. If that's the case, then suddenly there are lots of consumers in India who aren't going to be able to purchase an automobile. Right? And they are people that are prepared to take that risk. So you end up excluding them from the marketplace, and if you exclude them from the marketplace, that is a surplus, or a consumer surplus in particular, that is not captured. In contrast, if every country, particularly industrialized or higher income countries, imposed the lower standard, then many consumers and producers in those first world countries would suffer. And they would suffer in large part because there would be less consumer choice of the higher quality car, everything else constant. Okay, continuing with the incentives that exist, and now let's turn to the incentives for providing full information. And here's an example. We all know about the toy example from China that's been well documented over the course of the last few years. And this is an instance where strategically producers hid information, and consumers lacked a priori or ex ante information about the risk. More risky products are sold, quite obviously, as I just specified, at safer prices. By the way, remember 2 days, was it 2 or 3 days ago, when it was a dairy animal, right, that they discovered had mad cow disease? Now look at this. It was one animal, and moreover, the USDA chief of veterinary medicine came out and said that this was not a contagious infection. In fact, it was spontaneously developed through a mutation. But as soon as that was announced, talking about product safety and the risk aversion of consumers in the marketplace, the futures prices for live cattle were limited down, right? Because suddenly the expectation was the marketplace was going to become very concerned about the quality and safety of their meat consumption, and as a result, the expectation was demand was going to shift inward and prices were going to fall dramatically. Moreover, the last time there was a mad cow disease here in the United States, much of Asia imposed embargoes on beef or meat exports from the United States to, in particular, Japan. So that is a clear revelation of the kind of risk aversion that exists. Nobody wants to eat asparagus or lettuce that has been exposed to E. coli, right? I mean, people actually die from consuming such contaminated food items. So it's no surprise that there is great concern about the existence of toxic substances and how companies should be investing in safety. And since as in the case of pollution, there's an optimal level of pollution, and from an economic efficiency sense, there's also an optimal level of safety, which is not complete. So there's still some residual risk that's out there in which there could be, and often is, adverse consequences. And if you went to complete information and you found something was particularly hazardous, the examples that I just ran through, it could turn out that demand shifts so far in, there's no intersection between demand and supply, and as a result, the quantity moving through the market is zero. Right? Okay, let's turn to the third relationship, namely the innocent bystander, which we're referring to as third parties. And here, third parties have even less power in trying to structure their relationship, employee to employer, or customer or consumer to producer or seller, because there's no transaction here. And as we've found again and again, regardless of whether we're looking at water, air pollution, open access fisheries, agricultural land use, whatever we've looked at, when there's these externalities, governmental intervention is called for, unless the assumptions of the Coase theorem hold, right? Because if it turns out that there's zero transaction cost, and there's well-defined property rights, private parties can negotiate with each other to determine the efficient outcome. But the big assumption there is zero transaction cost. And if you don't find that argument and that logic compelling, then you have to explain why the transaction cost prohibits that particular outcome from achieving efficiency, right? Okay, there's all sorts of liability laws, and much of these liability laws turn on toxicity directly. And they are designed to provide the incentives for the producers, who are the source of these environmental externalities, to engage in precaution. Coming back to British Petroleum, if British Petroleum, given the accident that took place and the oil spill that took place, if they knew that was going to happen, right, you can imagine the kind of precautions they would have gone through. Because incrementally, they could have spent billions to protect themselves and the environment and the people that were harmed. But obviously, that is a thought experiment that doesn't make a lot of sense. But clearly, the liability that's emerged here is an incentive for investing by producers in more precaution. And there's all sorts of laws. This is not a law and economics course, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and I'm not going to hold you responsible for it, but you should be aware that there's all sorts of incentives that come through not only regulation, but through the judicial system and through statutory legislation that has been passed to protect society against toxic substances. A strict liability rule, plaintiffs don't need to prove negligence. If the action causes some damage, then the defendant is liable. When, of course, particularly when that contamination is known to be a hazardous toxic substance. Now, there are actions that are associated with criminal conduct, and here there's jail sentences that can emerge for certainly willful harm to individuals or innocent bystanders. And moreover,